There are a lot of fantastic duologies in film. Kill Bill, Blade Runner, The Godfather, and you might be scratching your head right now at that last one saying, oh, The Godfather isn't a duology, it's a trilogy. And to that, I say to all of you, shut up. There are definitely a lot of great examples of great film duologies as well as some pretty bad ones, but my personal favorite, which should be pretty obvious since it's the title and thumbnail of the video, is the Yojimbo series by Akira Kurosawa. Yojimbo, released in 1961, and Sanjuro, released in 1962. Both films star Toshiro Mifune as the nameless samurai, but most commonly referred to as Sanjuro since that's the made-up name he gives himself in both movies. I have a personal bias for these films, of course, since Kurosawa is my favorite filmmaker of all time, Toshiro Mifune is my favorite actor of all time, and I just really have a soft spot for samurai films in general. I can't get enough of them, especially the ones that actually acknowledge the flawed logic of the traditional samurai code. And there are a lot of those to go around, and these two are no different. So yeah, I have a bit of a soft spot for these movies. I shouldn't have to explain the impact that Yojimbo has had on film and media as a whole since it was first released over 60 years ago. I mean, yeah, you can thank these movies for giving Sergio Leone a career, but I also don't want the narrative and filmmaking genius that went into both of these movies to go disregarded, as they are both some of the greatest films to come out of the samurai genre and really just some of the best films ever made. It also might be a hot take for me to say this, but I think the sequel Sanjuro is even better than its predecessor. But this isn't a video to compare the two's greatness, rather it's to discuss what these movies do well, both in combination and on their own. Despite being very related, the stories and subtext couldn't be more different in these films. Yojimbo in a way has this more western-styled atmosphere, funny enough since it inspired many westerns that were released after, and Sanjuro follows a more feudal and culturally closer conflict. Yojimbo focuses on its moral dynamics, while in contrast, Sanjuro adds a more comedic and human portrayal to the character, while still keeping his mysterious status intact. If anything, it makes Sanjuro more than justify its existence as a sequel, despite the story not originally being intended to actually be a sequel, as the added development, stoicism, and maturity given to Sanjuro here make up more than half of what makes the character so special. He is, by and large, what makes these films as memorable as they are, both because of the nature of the character and the charisma and nuance added to him through the wonderful performance by Toshiro Mifune. His anonymity as the no-named character adds a sense of mysticism to him. He can get himself out of the toughest situations with on-the-spot thinking, even when in the most difficult situations, such as when he was beaten to near death in the third act of Yojimbo, or when he's tied up at the enemy house in Sanjuro. He always has a plan up his sleeve and is never not thinking on his feet. However, it's never blown out of reality since none of these plans are ever perfect. There are still holes and consequences with his actions, and he never really gets off scot-free. He will typically end up captured or has to give up his own profits in order to go through with these things, and he typically never sees the outcomes coming, and instead just improvises when that time does come. His plotting is flawed, but it is, in the best way to describe, good enough for him. These are how his actions and wit are put on a good display without removing the more human characteristics of the character. It just has the perfect balance of both. I was gonna say he'd kinda be like the perfect celebrity, but that doesn't make any sense since nobody fucking knows who he is. Despite hardly ever knowing the characters he meets and not even bothering to try and get to know them, he seems to understand them and their situations more than anyone and is willing to take the scariest risks for the sake of helping out. Protagonists like him are incredibly interesting to me because of their mask-wearing nature. They aren't saints by any means, but are always looking to help the little guy out. They're on the side of the underdogs and will completely screw over the oppressors in order to help them out. Even when their good deeds are acknowledged, they brush them off as if it's nothing or if they were never intending to help out to begin with. From what we are shown, we know their true nature without them needing to say it up front. They're more virtuous than others who would try to present themselves as such as when he spares the life of one of the young gangsters at the end of Yojimbo. We see he is committing a kind act without really thinking into it or trying to get anything out of it. He commits good deeds not because of circumstances or reward, but because it's the right thing to do, which is why he never really takes credit for any of them. A good example of this is in the finale of Sanjuro. Sanjuro, where he gets enraged with the group of young rebels after they praise him for cutting down Hanbei, as he's the only one there who truly grasps how serious the events that went down really were, and how tragic it is that he needed to be killed. I really love these kind-hearted yet very serious characters like him a lot, and it's really what makes these films so special to me. The character of the nameless Ronin is really the only thing that connects these two movies, as the stories are practically not connected in any way besides the recurring main character. This is because Kurosawa didn't originally intend on this being a sequel. Instead, he was just planning on making another simple adaptation of another story, but the studio was actually what recommended bringing Yojimbo back. Kurosawa and his producers have had rocky relationships in the past, and this by no means is the first time they made such a massive change to his film. But in this case, I believe it's a rare time where they actually helped improve the movie. Even other returning actors like Tatsuya Nakata and Takashi Shimura play entirely different characters despite being in pretty much the same roles as their previous characters. Sanjuro also never mentions the events of the previous films, leaving it as just another tale meant for that one town, thus adding to the legend of Sanjuro, the nameless Ronin. There are very few characters that are anywhere close to as cool as him, but it's also the clever nature and smart character writing that doesn't tell you too much or too little about him that makes him so intriguing. It makes him a character that you could easily expand the scope with in many different ways because of just how many things are left up to interpretation. He's a nameless hero done perfectly, and someone that a lot of Hollywood executives right now should seriously take more notes from for their masked characters. Probably the best and most well-regarded aspect of both of these films, though, is how well they build tension. These films are entertaining and eye-grabbing all the way through, and yet they hold far less action than you might assume or even remember them having. In both of these films, there is only one scene in their entirety that features action that goes on for longer than a minute, and even that still might be stretching it. It isn't the action and fighting itself that makes the battles in these films so intriguing, it's the character and intensity behind them. Around the middle of Yojimbo, we see Sanjuro watching the two rivaling gangs jumping back and forth from one another, and it tries getting you to wonder who's gonna strike first, but neither of them do, since they are far more concerned with their own lives and are too afraid of the outcome to just go in for the kill. They're building tension and comedy at the same time because while you're waiting for someone to attack, they're all too cowardly to do so, making it hilarious from our main character's perspective after they had treated him like the coward before he ditched them all. It contrasts richly with Sanjuro's actions, as he just jumps straight into the fight and takes care of things as quickly and efficiently as possible without thinking too much into the situation ahead of him. The climax of the first film is the most well-known scene and one of the most iconic scenes in all of film, and that's because of the tension and atmosphere. When people think of this climax, they don't think of the actual battle, despite how cool and satisfying that is. They think of the walk, the slow, intense walk towards one another from Yojimbo and the enemy gang. Why is that? Because it's intense and leaves you on the edge of your seat, wondering how and if Sanjuro will be able to take care of all of these men. The epic and mysterious atmosphere only adds onto the many layers of technical brilliance behind it. Sure, we saw him show his capabilities and be praised for his amazing swordsmanship skills, but he was also heavily injured by this point and was facing an entire gang, including a member with a handgun, all on his own. He gains nothing from fighting them. There is nobody watching, nobody's giving him a reward. He's just doing this to help out the restaurant owner. The atmosphere of the scene draws a mythical aura around this character that leaves you awestruck as he takes care of business. Sanjuro does this incredibly well, if not better, in its own climax. This long, drawn-out moment of the two swordsmen staring silently until they each draw one slash that decides the entire battle is one of the most well-directed and well-acted scenes in Kurosawa's entire filmography. The movie shuts your mouth and makes you wait and stare for an uncomfortably quiet and long moment. You believe you know how it'll turn out, but the high tension and the long wait begin to make you somewhat overthink it, kind of like the more inexperienced characters in these films. Yet it doesn't drag on too long and climaxes at the perfect time when the swords are drawn for an incredibly bloody finisher that wasn't even originally intended to be as gruesome as it was. It creates what just might be the most satisfying conclusion to any movie I've ever seen, as it ends with Sanjuro saying his iconic goodbye, "See ya around," before walking away just like in the last film. It encapsulates encapsulates the repetitive journey of the mysterious no-named man traveling around Japan with his only desires being food and a roof to sleep under, while also giving a hand to those who are in need of it in the process, for no other reason other than he just feels like it. You could tell an endless amount of stories with this character, but Kurosawa settled for two very well written tales that are more than enough to make this mythical-like warrior one of the best characters in all of film. The masterful writing and long drawn-out build-up to the short yet sweet action with one of the most morally fascinating protagonists ever introduced is the primary reason why I consider Yojimbo and Sanjuro to be one of the greatest duologies in film. I love these movies, and if you watch them you probably will too, so yeah, watch them if you can. But that just about wraps it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment down below what other movies you'd like to see me cover next. I have a lot of stuff planned, and I have a lot more Kurosawa movies that I plan on reviewing as well. So if you enjoy videos on filmmakers like Kurosawa, then you should definitely subscribe to the channel. We've been growing pretty fast, and I'm very overwhelmed but very thankful for it, and I hope the growth continues. And I'm very glad that a lot of you guys have stuck around with me for so long now. But with all that being said, I'll see you guys next time. Y'all have a good day.